Job has a wife in 4 of the verses of the 42 chapters of his book of the Bible. In chapter 31, Job defends himself to his friends by pointing to his faithfulness to his wife. If my heart has been enticed by a woman, or if I have lurked at my neighbor's door, then may my wife grind another man's grain, and may other men sleep with her, for that would have been wicked, a sin to be judged. In chapter 19, just before his confession of confidence in his Redeemer, Job laments that my breath is offensive to my wife. I am loathsome to my own family. And the only other 2 verses of the book that mention Job's wife are in chapter 2. After Job lost his children, his possessions, and his health, his wife said to him, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." He replied, "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. Now, the book of Job is Job's story, and it's a work of poetry meant to explore the wisdom of God in sending suffering on his people, even on people as faithful to him as Job. So let's not get all worked up about the apparent sexism of largely ignoring Job's wife in the story. It's just not about her, and that's fine. But this little devotion is about her, so we have to grapple with the fact that she suffered everything her very faithful husband suffered. She lost her kids, her possessions, and her husband's health, too. And it is suffering to be loathsome to those whom you love, and to find loathsome someone whom you love. And it's true that her words were foolish, because it is never a good or moral idea to curse God, but we can understand where she is coming from, right? And as we grapple with all of that, we have to grapple with the fact that she is, except for those few points, completely ignored in the story of her husband's suffering, which was also her own, and in the exploration of the wisdom of God in sending suffering on his people, even on people as faithful to him as Job, and on their spouses too. And that's fine, but it's also not. Because we don't suffer alone. Not ever. Nothing you are going through afflicts only you. No struggle you face goes unnoticed by those who care about you. No suffering is only yours. And wouldn't it have been nice to hear how Job's wife handled the suffering that was both of theirs? Wouldn't it be more satisfying to hear if she ever came up with less foolish words about the ordeal? Wouldn't it be comforting to hear that she was restored too, the way Job was at the end of the epic poem exploring the wisdom of God? But it must be God's wisdom that we don't get that much as we might want it. Because Job's perspective on his own suffering is rare in that he got an answer and restoration. Job's wife's suffering is much more like our own in that we don't. We are guaranteed neither an explanation nor a recovery. So what do we know that Job's wife got out of it all? Only this: she got called out on her foolish talk. Job had nearly 40 chapters of dialogue with his friends from which he learned nothing until God spoke up and put them all in their place, and Job was humbled because Job was faithful. Job's wife speaks in only 1 verse and gets chastised for her foolish but understandable reaction to her suffering. So it's Job's wife rather than Job who may have had a chance at learning from the situation. Job's faith was reinforced by hearing again what he already knew. Maybe Job's wife's faith was improved upon when she was told to accept both good and trouble from her God. I don't know that for sure. We can't. But we can imagine, and in so doing we can relate even more to Job's wife than to Job. Because her suffering got no explanation or resolution, like ours often doesn't. But maybe her suffering brought her closer to her God than she was before it happened, like ours often does. So let's imagine, and let's learn with Job's wife, that our foolish talk is no less foolish for being understandable, and our suffering can be good for us even as it is trouble, and that we do not suffer alone, not ever, especially not when we realize by the faith that is growing and improving in us that our Redeemer suffered, not to take our suffering away, not yet, but to make it good for us, for now, and to bring us closer to Him than we were before it happened. You and I are dust and breath, loved by God, bought by Jesus. This podcast is written and produced by me, Ethan Cherney, a WELS pastor serving Our Savior Lutheran Church in Pomona, California. Get in touch on Facebook at Dust and Breath Pod, on Twitter at Dust Breath Pod, or by emailing dustandbreathpod@gmail.com. Outro music is arranged and performed by Mr. Peter Shawi, who is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season and whose leaf does not wither. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you could leave a review in iTunes or just share an episode on social media, I'd really appreciate it. It's the only way other people can find the show. Now, go do what God made you to do. Be who God called you to be. Go see what God can do with dust and breath and faith in Jesus, His Son.